Okay, so terms and conditions then. This is a lot. So I'm going to split it into two sections. The first section, this one, I'm going to tell you what you need to include in your terms and conditions. The next one's going to tell you what you can't legally put in there. Please pay attention to that stuff in that next lesson about unfair terms, because so many people seem to think they can put whatever they want in there, and you really can't. There's lots of misinformation and misunderstandings because a lot of the Facebook groups are international and we've got different laws, and the others seem to have less strict enforcement than what we've got here. So, first of all, what are your terms and conditions and why do we need them? So it's basically a document that sets out the terms of the sales contract. A basic sales contract is when you agree to supply a product and they agree to pay a price. So when you take your chosen bikini to counter at Primark, if you decide you don't like it, you can take it back for a full refund. But our businesses, they're a lot more complex. We have upfront payments, we've got personalised items that are made to order. So what happens if complications arise or if alterations to contract are needed from either side? The point of your terms and conditions is to lay out in writing what is expected from you and from the customer. Biggest way that they help us in this industry is that they let the customer know what to do in case of a complaint or a cancellation, or if they want to make changes to their order. So it's protect both sides from losing unnecessary money. Don't zone out thinking that you might struggle to produce them and it seems a bit much, because that's what I'm here for. I've produced a template for your terms and conditions, but please do watch and listen this lesson and the next one, because it will be of great benefit to you when using that template. So this document, you send it directly to the customer, not as a link. Send them a PDF that cannot be altered, and you send it after they've agreed to the price along with their complete order confirmation for them to check and approve. I'll detail all of this when I teach you your customer service processes later. So you don't just pin them to the top of your social media profile or on your website and expect that everybody sees and reads and understands them. You can't enforce them unless you know that they've received them before payment. So send them the document to their inbox wherever you are, like discussing the order. Now, you can alter your terms at any time, but the ones that were in place when they ordered are the ones that they are bound to. You can't change them for that customer after they've paid and entered the sales contract. By doing so, you would be in breach of that contract and they would be entitled to the money back. So let them know by making a payment. This means that they are accepting your terms and conditions. This will make them more inclined to read them. They don't need to sign anything contrary to popular belief. You send them as a document before they pay. You ask them to read them through before making any payment. Then payment after that just means that they've agreed to them. If they won't accept them, if they disagree with anything, that's what I would call a client red light. So, stop there, don't proceed. So once they've made any payment, they have now entered what's called under consumer law a sales contract, and they are now bound by those terms and conditions that you've sent to them. However, your terms and conditions have got to be fair for them to be legal. If they are not written fairly, if they go against consumer law, they are not legally binding, even if they have agreed to them. I'll go deeper into unfair terms next lesson, like I said, but basically there can't be an imbalance in your favour. So I want to make sure you don't end up stood up against trading standards or in small claims court, or indeed the unruly court of social media. So nothing in your terms and conditions can affect statutory consumer rights. So as I discussed in that previous lesson about consumer law, they have to pay the agreed price and you have to supply a product that's fit for purpose as described and of satisfactory quality, etc. I will link to that lesson if you haven't seen it yet, because the knowledge in there is going to help you to understand this stuff clearer. So your terms and conditions, they don't have to be written or approved by a solicitor, but they do need to be able to stand up in court. That's where your knowledge of consumer law is valuable. So hopefully I'm helping with that. That's what I'm here for. I will post links as usual to official sources that explain what's meant by unfair terms. But most of that's applicable to us, I will put in the next lesson. This lesson, I'm telling you what you need to include in your terms and conditions. So let's begin by getting realistic. You can't expect somebody to know that you need a cake returned within 48 hours in case of complaint unless you have told them that. You can't expect the balance payment by a certain date unless you've told them that. We know by common knowledge people generally don't read terms and conditions. We don't all do it, until it's time to enforce them. Like in case they've got a complaint or you've told them they can't have the deposit back, that's when they're going to go and read them. So do try and encourage them to read them by making them easy to access, easy to read, easy to understand. Please, no legalese, right? The official links that I've posted for you attached to this video specifically say they do need to be written in accessible language. So what do you need to include? You need to include details about payments, if they want to make changes to the order, postponements, cancellations, complaints, refunds, returns, deliveries, collections, etc. So I'm going to break that down into detail section by section. You're best having a clearly titled paragraph for each one of these topics. So number one, payments, cover payments. So when you give a quote, how long is it valid for? Talk about how to pay, when to pay. These are your choice. They obviously need to be reasonable. Please go into detail about what the upfront payments cover so that they can understand that that physical supply of the cake on the day, that's not the only work that we do for their order. So a deposit, legally defined, I'll give you that link. A deposit is defined as a reservation fee for your time and or your goods, right? It can only be a small percentage of the full amount. Small isn't legally defined anywhere that I've seen. So the payment of a deposit means you are now turning other work away for that diary slot. As I said, I'm going to go deep into unfair terms next lesson, but you can't say that a deposit is non-refundable under all circumstances. You need to make it clear at what point that deposit, that date reservation fee, becomes non-refundable. So when is it reasonably too late for you to book other work in for that day? When are you losing out as a result of that cancellation? So if your business mainly provides celebration cakes, 1 month's notice of a birthday cake cancellation, you're likely to be able to rebook that slot. So it would be likely deemed reasonable in law for them to expect that deposit back. But if you're a wedding cake only business, 1 month's notice for a wedding cancellation, you're unlikely to be able to book another wedding in. But if you make weekend treats as well, you can advertise and very likely fill that date with other orders. So what would be fair for both sides? What if you've turned down another wedding booking or a big, a good money market event for that date? This is your choice. It depends on how your business runs, but it needs to be fair and justifiable in the eyes of consumer law. Imagine you end up in small claims court or trading standards come knocking. How are you going to justify keeping that money? So your terms do need to be fair. If you choose to call their first payment an initial payment or a booking fee, you need to make it clear what that covers, what that means. I see no reason to complicate things by not calling it a deposit, right? Because deposit is a legally defined term. It's a reservation fee. Either way, you can't call anything non-refundable just as a blanket term unless you can show your losses or prove what benefit the customer's received to justify keeping it. It is a common misconception that by calling it a booking fee or an initial payment that you can then say it's non-refundable. The word deposit isn't what's the issue, it's the words non-refundable that can get you into bother. I've seen somebody suggesting that it pays for the quote in a messaging process, but unless you're charging everybody for quotes, how can that be justified? Again, I don't want to antagonise anybody, but I'm looking at these after spending quite a lot of time reading the actual legislation and deciphering it. My main aim is to help you to avoid litigation or reputation damage. So an advance payment, right, covers work as you go. So wedding consultations, samples, design work. If they cancel and you want to keep those advance payments, you need to justify it by showing the benefit that that client's already received for that money. If you've used money up front to buy materials like bespoke toppers, monogram stamps that you can't use elsewhere and you can't send back, keep the money, show them your receipts by all accounts. Give them the toppers that they've paid for. Have all this clearly stated in your terms. If they've paid you for a sketched design, if they've paid you for it, that design's now theirs. You know, if you won't let them take it to another baker, that is your right to say so, but you can't really charge them for that sketch if they're not getting any benefit from it. That's a whole complicated ethical situation if they take your design elsewhere. But this is why you get paid properly for such skilled work up front. Make sure you get those advance payments and advise them what they do cover, you know, fairly. If they don't pay when agreed to, state what happens in this section of your document. Make sure it's not unfair. Make it easy by sending them a reminder 7 or 14 days before payment's due. I will go into more detail about all of that stuff when I cover your order processes later. I'm going to give you like a tick list of things to do. If you will be charging extra on top of the quoted price for delivery, state that clearly before the order. So you've got no hidden charges then. It is reasonable for them to assume delivery of a massive cake. So if you're going to be charging them an extra fee, just make it clear before they pay anything, especially if it does need to be delivered, you know, if it's massive, if it's fragile. In this section, be careful about anything that can look like a sanction or a penalty type payment, like a late collection fee, postponement charge, cancellation charges. This stuff, it needs to be justified. I would say preferably avoided, because they can land you in bother if the shit does hit the fan further down the line. Also consider these might piss people off. They might put them off ordering in the first place. They're more likely to complain or to take complaints further or their social media posts further if you've wound them up. So just be careful how you word things about such, you know, things like that. If you've given an estimated price because, say, the wedding's booked 2 years in advance, you must give a maximum expected price, or at least don't try and tie them into the contract before they know a maximum of what they're going to be paying. At least just charge that small deposit to save the date and then tell them when to expect a final price, but don't do any work for it yet. You need to allow them their full deposit, you know, that date reservation fee back if your price comes in higher than what they were expecting. So make sure they know the sort of prices that your wedding cakes go for before they pay a deposit, because you don't want to get them in for a consultation like a year down the line and find out that the budget's like threepence halfpenny, you know. Right, your next section, section 2, I would cover changes. So at what point can they no longer make any changes? When will you have bought supplies specifically for that order? What if they now want a type of cake that you won't or don't or can't make? What if they realise after ordering they need it to be dairy free? What if they want a complete redesign? What if they just change the colour? What if they change the venue to a lot further away? What if they now want a smaller or a bigger order? You know, can they carry their payment forward to a new date for the same cake if that event gets postponed? All of these things are changes to the contract that you've agreed to. So if they insist on them, that contract's now breached, you know, to varying degrees, but this is their fault. So new details need to be agreed to, and you are allowed to cover your reasonable costs in any new price that you come up with. Just take a drink one sec. So these are all up to you. They must be fair and reasonable, but make it clear the more notice that you get of changes or cancellations, the less money that they lose, because the less work you'll have done up front and the less money you'll have spent of theirs. Right, your next section I would cover cancellations. So you've been clear in the payment section what those upfront payments are for. So at what point do they start to lose money if they cancel? If they've paid 100% up front, but they give you 6 months notice of cancellation, what happens? You know, what happens if you need to cancel because you're poorly or you've got an emergency? If they cancel, can their deposit or advance payments be used for a different order for the future? Please remember how gently you should handle these situations though, because if this person's cancelled the wedding, they're probably heartbroken, hemorrhaging money left, right and centre. Don't let yourself become an easy target. Be careful with your words here. Be sympathetic. Remember, in the eyes of the law, if they give you reasonable notice to refill that diary slot, you haven't suffered 100% losses, so you can't keep 100% of the contract price. So in the eyes of the law, you can fit more work in. So you're going to struggle to justify keeping all upfront payments if they want to cancel. So this is why, going back to that first section about payments, you make it clear what those advance payments cover and that they will lose money because you've already earned it or spent it on supplies specific to their order. So the fourth section, I would cover complaints, refunds and returns, right? This is quite a big one. So what should they do in case of a complaint? In what situation do they need to return the products? When our photo is acceptable. How long do they have to make a complaint? Remember, if it's a quality issue that you need to have a look at the cake and have a poke at it to understand what's gone wrong, it needs to be returned to you before your suggested eat by date, and it needs to have been stored according to your instructions. So put that in here. If a photo can prove the issue though, if it's the wrong flavour, misspelt name, if that's provable by photo and by looking at your order confirmation, then that 30-day refund rule's possibly applicable rather than, the perishable items rule, because that's an easily proved fault. The product wasn't as described. But do remember, these products are avoidable by keeping your order processes tight. So, as I always say, do your fucking job properly. Right. Industry specific, something to put in here. You need to cover yourself with regards to the fact that handmade products are not able to perfectly match inspiration photos. That is acceptable under consumer law as long as they know that that is the case up front. Also in this section, cover damage and contamination and how they're expected to look after what they've bought. Tell them you've got a production process backed by science that makes sure their items are assembled and packed and stored properly by you prior to supply, and that they will be given care instructions for travel and storage. Don't worry, this fuck up proof process is coming your way from me soon, right? So if they haven't followed your care advice, any complaints about melting and collapsed just will not be considered. That is fair, I would suggest. Also stick a bit in here about damage or contamination caused by other people, sticking poisonous flowers in cake or putting a glittery topper on that sheds toxic glitter everywhere, If you're willing and able to repair or replace, put it in there. If they take a speed bump at 60 miles an hour, it might be possible to repair or replace at cost to them if it's immediately returned to you. But you don't have to do this when it's their mistake. If you buy a mirror and you drop it in the car park, you don't expect Wilco's to come and replace it for you, do you? I'd advise putting something in there like, complaints will be fully investigated before we decide action or response. Please allow, say, 48 hours for a decision, and that abusive messages, threats, unfair reviews and social media posts won't be tolerated. Legal advice might be sought. But do remember, they've got a right to leave a factually correct review at any time. But you can give yourself time to take a breath, and ask for advice in my Facebook group. You can post anonymously. Add in there that complaints in most situations must come directly from the buyer, and refunds are only going to be sent to the buyer. Be aware, if it's a food safety complaint, it doesn't have to come from the buyer. Anybody that's eaten food you've supplied can report you to environmental health. So you do have to take it seriously. You should technically self-report to your local food safety team and show your paperwork for that order. So don't try and put anything in there that takes away their rights in that situation. But do state refunds will only ever go to the buyer. Advise that bakes might contain allergens, Southampton 6 colours, non-edible elements. It's the buyer's responsibility to keep hold of and pass on that information to anybody who eats or handles the cake. So they can't try and blame you for an allergic reaction because you've passed that information on clearly to the buyer. Also sticking a bit about cake smashes. It's ridiculous that we need to cover ourselves for this shit, but you will have labelled the fact that there are dowels in the cake. So if some dickhead shoves the 9-year-old niece's face into the cake and she ends up bleeding, it's the dickhead's fault, it's not ours. We need to put dowels in there, and we've told the buyer that they are in there and the cake's not being used for its intended purpose. So that, I think that would be fair to put that in. So your fifth section, put something about dietary requirements, whether or not you cater for them, dietary requirements or preferences. In this section, cover the fact that during the order process, you will have discussed this with them before they've made any payment. Cover, you are qualified, you're confident that whatever you are doing is safe and compliant with food safety, food labelling laws. If you offer anything like vegan, halal, gluten-free, this is where you can reassure them that you know what they're doing, what you are doing. It's perfectly acceptable for a home kitchen business to not cater for celiac, anaphylactic reactions, or strict beliefs and values that aren't served in your home. If they ask after the order's placed, this counts as a change to the contract. If you can't safely or comfortably do it, or your kitchen doesn't comply to gluten-free regs or to their beliefs, or you don't have a proven recipe even, to make that kind of thing, it's not something that your business offers, you have the right to cancel. And refer them back here to the changes section to clarify that. Right, next, section 6, delivery and collection. So do you offer delivery, i.e. collection only? How are collections arranged? If they don't collect when agreed, what happens? What happens if they need to change the collection or delivery time? What happens if they're late? Cover here what you charge for delivery or if it's included in price, for example, above a certain order amount. Remember, according to section 2F of the Office of Fair Trading's Unfair Contract Terms Guidance, the next lesson is all about that document. You cannot limit your liability for delay of supply. So you set a time of delivery or collection, make sure that it's stuck to. Don't say every effort will be made unless every effort will be made. It's your responsibility to make sure that you know about roadworks. It's easy to check on Google nowadays, how busy a route's going to be, and just have the product ready for collection or arrange delivery time for well before that event begins. I might have said that a bit wonky. So to clarify, have your product ready or arrange the delivery time, both situations, for before the event begins. I'd never recommend delivering at the start of a party or having them collect on the way to the party. If there's a mistake on your part, you haven't got time to put it right then, and you're at risk of not being able to fulfill your side of the contract, which would mean a refund. Again, it might seem a lot to worry about, but I'm going to give you all those little details to think about in a tick list in the order process course that I'll be writing next. Right, if you do weddings or other big events, you need a specific section about venue setup, venue staff, venue dressers, a florist if they're supplying you flowers. So the customer needs to inform you of who they are, how you can contact them, and of any changes, right? Just so you can liaise with them really well. Also cover cake stands in this section. Do you provide them, and what are you going to do if the one that they provide for you isn't strong enough or big enough for you to put the cake on? So yeah, then number 7, if you hire out cake stands or other such things, have a 7th section about how you handle that. Then your last section, privacy, data protection information. Imagine like we post a wedding cake photo, we congratulate the couple by tagging them, right? Or even just saying the first names, but the top has got Mr. and Mr. Smith on there. And we tell social media where the venue was and on what day they got married. And there's a photo of the kids on the table next to the cake. And then somebody asks how much for this, and we put it there in public, what that couple paid for the wedding cake, right? We're not keeping that couple's data safe. You can't do that stuff. So if anything will identify them, you need permission. I did a lesson about GDPR. Go and find it if you don't know what I'm talking about. So when and how to send this document to them then. So they've agreed to a price. You then send them a summary of the full order details for them to double check, and attach the terms and conditions document, not a link, to it, and clearly ask them to read them before making payment. Do not pin this to the top of your Facebook page and assume, or on your website, and assume that everybody's seen them and read them, right? Don't send them to a website link because that can be altered by you. Don't send them a document that can be altered by them. Yeah. If you change your terms and conditions at any point, it is only the ones that were in place when they booked that count. So if you try and change that contract after they've agreed to it, you're now in breach, and they can cancel and expect a full refund, if they want to. I would suggest taking screenshots to prove you've sent them, and make it clear to them that, and that you've made it clear to them that they should read them. I'm starting to lose my voice again. So when you create this document, you need to make it clear and concise. Don't be too wordy. Use separate paragraphs, clear, bold titles, so that they can find the bits that they need easily. Right, anything that might put them at a disadvantage needs to be made very clear, easy to read. Above all, please have the balls to enforce them. Yeah. So, right, after all that, I'm next going to go into what you can't put in your terms and conditions. There is legislation about unfair contract terms. I see a lot of them, unfortunately, online just because of that misinformation that spreads, because of these international cake groups. Some UK laws don't always apply. Just because one person that swears that theirs are checked by a solicitor, it doesn't mean that they're telling the truth. It doesn't mean their solicitor were any good. It doesn't mean you should copy theirs, right? Stay safe out there. Unfair terms coming next.